Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're going to be talking about all of the books that I read in January. This month I read, or I guess it's last month now, I read 21 books overall. I had 3 ebooks, 10 audiobooks, and 8 physical books, so I'm pretty happy with that spread. It's pretty even. There's a couple books in this video that I'm not going to completely dive into just because the video that I read them for hasn't gone up yet because I'm still finishing it or still editing it. So for those books, I'm going to be just giving you kind of a basic plot synopsis and not really talking about my rating or anything, just because I want to wait for the video to like fully dive into those. I don't think I have anything else to say, so let's get started. I'm going to talk about the physical books that I read this month first, and I'm going to start with the 2 books that I didn't read in any video that I just read for myself and you didn't get to hear any thoughts about. So the very first book that I read this month was Beartown by Frederick Bachman, and I wasn't expecting to love it as much as I did, but this is like top 10 all-time favorites now. This has a deep exploration into the human condition, but through an unconventional way. So we're following this hockey team in this small town. Hockey is like the whole heart of the town. A lot of the team members we get kind of perspectives from, or I guess it's told in third person, but we get to follow them throughout their story, and we get perspectives of parents and siblings and other people in the town. And hockey is really the heart of this town, but it doesn't come without its issues. It made me feel sad, it made me feel angry, I was grieving for certain characters, I was happy for other characters. Yeah, just the full range of emotions throughout this whole story. The writing is so good. Obviously, it's Frederick Bachman, so we didn't expect any less, but overall, 10 out of 10. First book of the year was 5 stars, and it was also the only full 5-star book that I read this month. But I'm so happy that I did because now I can add it to my all-time favorite stack. Okay, the other book I read this month that I didn't talk about in anything was The Mothers by Britt Bennett. This has been sitting on my shelves for years. I think I got it pretty quickly after it came out. I love the cover of this. I wasn't sure going in if it was actually going to be something I loved, but Britt Bennett is like a lot of people's favorite writer or highly acclaimed in a lot of different literary spheres around the world. So I picked it up. I was pretty sure there was something back in those claims, and this is not the type of story that I traditionally read on this channel. In this book, we are getting occasional chapters of the church mothers speaking kind of collectively. So it starts out, I think the first line already is like, we didn't believe when we first heard, because you know how church folk can gossip. So it's kind of the church mothers collectively reflecting the events of this story through their eyes. We also get kind of a third person perspective, just telling the general story of these teenagers that kind of have some secrets and this tiny town, and it's just a very general literary fiction. It didn't do anything incredible with the plot, but something about the writing was so captivating, and the way that the story was told, even though it wasn't necessarily the most original story, was so beautiful and wonderful. I thought this also did a really good job of touching on kind of the judgment that maybe people can feel in the church and things that they feel like they have to hide from the church. But to be fair and honest, this book is not about the church. Like, it's not set in a religious tone at all, or like from a religious viewpoint. The church is just a fixture in the story. So that was something that I wasn't sure if I was going to love, but ended up being totally okay with me because it wasn't trying to press any religious things on you. It was just part of the story, and it helped move the story along. So I give this 4 stars. I thought it was really, really good. Okay, now we can jump into books that I read for videos this month. So the first video I think I posted this month, vlog-wise, was just my January reading vlog, which is something I'm doing every month now, where I just read some random books that I can't fit into other videos, but that I want to read, and we just call it the monthly reading vlog. So I read The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. This is a book that is obviously so widely beloved, and I'm so glad that I finally read it and I like understand what the story's about. This is a very like speculative literary fiction where there's like some strange magic going on. We're following the perspective of this little boy and like the really odd events of his childhood. It's like this weird, like, realistic fantasy. I don't really know how to describe it. I think in this video where I read this, I said this is kind of just like a children's story for adults. There's really interesting touches of magical realism. I loved the characters. His neighbors become kind of a really important fixture in this story, and they are going on kind of these adventures to resolve this kind of magical chain reaction of events. And I gave it a 3.5. I thought it was really good. Neil Gaiman loves cats and I love cats, so I really appreciated the attention that cats got in this story. I thought that that was so fun. I love a book with a cat or multiple cats. And overall, yeah, the writing was just great and I had a good time. Was this my favorite book ever? No. Yeah, overall 3.5 stars. I'm glad that I finally read it. I also read Sometimes I Lie by Alice Feeney, and this book was fine. It was just, it was a really like run-of-the-mill thriller. We're following this girl. She's in a coma. She's trying to remember how she got here, what happened to her. The police are investigating. They don't really know what's going on either. Literally nothing happens for the first probably 150 pages in this book. Like, we could have just cut all of that out and we could have had a much better thriller novella than a almost 300-page thriller. This is Alice Feeney's debut, so I mean, I never expect a ton from debuts, but overall this is a 2.5. It was like super just fine. There was a little bit of discussion in here about like women's bodies and women's presentation in society that I didn't really appreciate running through the female characters in this story, so that was also like not super fun. There were a couple fun twists in here at the end once things actually started going on, but nothing too crazy, nothing that shocked me, nothing that, you know, made me think that this was worthy of anything more than a 2.5 star, so that's what it got. I read The Host by Stephanie Meyer. I don't have the dust jacket. I lost it years and years and years ago. This book I read for my Fantasy Dream Girl reading vlog, which is up. It went up last weekend, I think. I'm gonna set this down now because I don't think you care to look at the yellow cover of this, but I read The Host. It was on my shelves for literally years. I think probably like 8 years that's been sitting on my shelves, so I'm so glad that I finally read it. It was really solid at the beginning and really solid at the end, but in traditional Stephanie Meyer fashion, we had absolutely nothing happening for 200 pages in the middle. It really could have been cut down to a 400-page sci-fi fantasy dystopian situation, but no, we didn't do that. Again, I'm like glad that I read this and I'm glad to be in the know, and I really did enjoy the first third and the last third of the book. I gave it 3.5 stars. It was a solid read. I'm never gonna read it again. I'm so glad that I finished up with it. In this book, we are following Melanie and Wanderer. Wanderer is like this alien being, and she gets inserted into different host bodies. Melanie is our human host, and Melanie's soul doesn't go away like it's supposed to when Wanderer gets inserted into the body, so they have this kind of internal monologue. Melanie wants to see if her family is still alive, and Wanderer wants to do what she's supposed to do. So they kind of go on this adventure together where they're warring in the same host head and trying to decide what's best. And classic dystopian, obviously, super interesting world, interesting concept for sure. I give Stephanie Meyer props for that. But overall, again, it wasn't anything super incredible or fantastic. 3.5 stars. Glad that I finished it. Then I read Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. Again, one that's been sitting on my shelves for years, and I'm so glad that I read this. I really didn't think that I was going to like it very much. If anything, I was just predicting it would be a 3 star, but it was actually so good. I gave this 4 stars. I had a really fun time. It's a castle YA fantasy. Our main girly, Mare, is a common folk, but she kind of ends up in a situation where she's having to work at the castle. But then she finds out that there's something really, really special at her by accident at the castle. And then they have to decide what to do with her. There's a resistance rising in the background that she is kind of wondering if she should get involved with, become the face of, because she is in a position to do so. And she's really just going on this adventure with the princes and the betrayal in the castle and wondering who she can trust. And it was exactly what I expected, but it was done in a better way than I thought that it was going to be. So 4 stars. I'm so glad that I read this. The last two physical books that I read of the month were for my thrillers reading vlog. The first one was The Fury by Alex Michaelides. This is the author of The Silent Patient, which is one of my favorite thrillers of all time. This, unfortunately, is not one of my favorite thrillers of all time. The writing style of this is very interesting and I appreciate the liberties that it took, but I honestly just think that I'm like too stupid to really enjoy what it did. We are following our main character, who is also our narrator, and he's kind of reflecting on these past events, and he's writing it in a play format. So he's telling us the story retrospectively. He's a bit of an unreliable narrator because he's a character in the story. He's kind of weird and we get like kind of like off vibes from him from the start of the book. So we are just listening to him tell us the story about how one of his friends got murdered on this Greek island over Easter weekend. Okay, Easter actually has nothing to do with it, so I don't know why he felt the need to include that they were going over Easter weekend, because they never once mention Easter. We could have just picked a random weekend, you know what I mean? Part 2 in this book was really, really solid, and the rest of the parts of this book were so boring. The twists at the end were kind of fun, I guess, but I don't think that they were worth the payoff of like the length of this, because there's so much page time wasted on interjections from Elliot, our narrator, saying like random things about himself or random things about the story, and then he's like, oh no, I shouldn't have said that, sorry, let's get back to the story, but wait, now I opened this door, so let's go ahead and talk about it. I just like was irritated by it, because it's okay and it's fun if that happens every now and then, but it was happening like every single chapter, and if you know Alex Michaelides, you know that his chapters are like 3 pages long. So that's a lot of wasted space on interjections from our unreliable narrator, right? I just couldn't love it as much as I wanted to, as much as I tried to, I just couldn't, and I gave it 2 stars. And the last physical book I read this month is The Intern by Michelle Campbell. This book was interesting. It was fine. I gave it a 3.5 star. 2 different perspectives. One is Kathy, the judge in this story, and the other is Maddie, the intern in this story. Maddie and Kathy enter this kind of like rocky relationship. Maddie's brother is in trouble, and he's claiming that the judge presiding over his case is corrupt. Maddie's like, I don't think so. I really look up to this woman. She's a professor in one of my classes. I love her. She's a really accomplished woman, and I don't think that she could be dirty, but okay. They kind of enter this tumultuous, non-trusting relationship with each other as Kathy finds out more about Maddie and Maddie finds out more about Kathy. I don't know that I would describe this as a legal thriller, though it is set in a legal setting. We don't get any like court transcripts or court scenes. It's kind of like the behind the scenes of a legal thriller almost. I really cared about the relationship between these 2 women. I thought it was super interesting, and they had a really kind of fun dynamic going on, and there was a cat in this book, so that gets brownie points from me every time. But overall, there were not really any like big twists in this book. Like, I don't even know if there were really any plot twists in this book. We were kind of just like figuring out what's going on. I would almost describe this more as like a crime novel than I would a thriller. The biggest issue I had with this book is the writing itself is very, very, very simple. Like the sentence structure itself is very, very, very simple. I felt like I was reading like a young adult novel, and it was really like grating on me. So overall, I gave this a 3.5. Objectively, this is a 3, but I gave it a half point because I really liked the cat's character arc. The cat has like a full character arc, and I was really grateful for that. Okay, now I'm just gonna go in order of when I read them. So the first audiobook I listened to this year was Thank You for Listening by Julia Whalen. So Swanee's kind of like not sure what to do with her life. She used to be an actress, but she got in an accident and now her face is like deformed. So she's really struggling to find parts. She turned to audiobook narrating while she was healing from her accident. And now she doesn't know if she really wants to keep doing that or if she wants to try to get back on the acting scene. She has kind of this developed hatred for narrating audiobooks, but she keeps doing it. Just when she's looking to get back on the acting scene and she feels confident enough to put herself back out there, one of the very famous authors that she's narrated a lot of books for passes away, and she has asked that Swanee and this other very mysterious audiobook narrator that no one knows who it is narrate this book together. And maybe they like fall in love a little bit. I really like this book. Julia Whelan is one of my favorite audiobook narrators, and I think we can really see parts of herself coming through in this story, although obviously this is fiction. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was super fun, and I gave it a 4.5 stars. I would really recommend it. And I would recommend listening to it as an audiobook, which is what I did. Okay, then I read You Can Trust Me by Wendy Hurd. This is a thriller. I don't think that this is young adult, but again, it kind of read like young adult, so maybe it was. We're following these two women who are kind of con artists. During one of their long cons, Leo disappears, and so Summer decides that she's gonna find her. She ends up making her way to this private island, and this billionaire who's kind of suspicious, and everything on the island actually is kind of suspicious. And so she's just trying to figure out what happened to Leo. And honestly, I don't remember it very well because I really didn't like this. The first half was interesting, and then the second half I was so bored, and there was just so many random details, and I felt like this book was way too long, and I just didn't really like it. I gave it 2 stars. Then I read Animal Farm by George Orwell. This is a very short classic that I never had to read in high school, so I wanted to be in the know about it. So I read it, and it was so interesting. I really, really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. Obviously, this is a satirical call out on governmental structures, but set on a farm. So we're watching animals go down this unhinged governmental path instead of humans, which really allows us to kind of see the irony about us either defending or objecting certain political systems. If you haven't read it, I think you should. It's really short and it's easy to understand, and I'm just glad that I'm in the know about it. Okay, then I read The Children on the Hill by Jennifer McMahon. This is kind of a Frankenstein-esque literary horror. Obviously, we have the traditional like generational timelines that we always see with Jennifer McMahon. In this case, we're set at this kind of mental reformatory. I don't know really what the correct term would be. Like, it's not really a sanitarium, but it's kind of a sanitarium. We're following these kids that are the grandchildren of the woman who is like in charge of the establishment. A stranger shows up one day, and they kind of have to figure out what's going on, who she is, where she's from, what she's doing. As they're doing so, they find out a whole bunch of secrets about the reformatory asylum, whatever we want to call it. And then in present day, we are following the perspective of one of the kids, and she's now a monster hunter. And so she's kind of going on this adventure looking for something specific. And I'm just a big Jennifer McMahon fan. Like, I think that she writes really fun, quiet horror. I say that all the time because I read a lot of her books on this channel. This was no different. I gave it 4 stars. It was a fun time. Then I read Lost in the Moment and Found by Shauna McGuire in preparation for the new book, which is already out now, but I have not read yet. This is probably my favorite book in the series. We are following Ancy, and she ends up in this kind of midway portal between lots of the worlds, and it's where lost things go to be found, and she's learning a lot about other people and herself through her journey, as everyone does in Shauna McGuire's books, and I just thought that it was a really good, fun time. Okay, then back to kind of another modern classic. I read The Alchemist, and I don't get the hype about this book. It was fine. It was a middle grade about a boy who goes on adventure and learns to listen to his heart. That's when you find the real treasure of life. But like, I just found it kind of cheesy, and I don't understand why this is like a beloved classic for so many people, because for me, I was like, man, I've read so many better middle grades than this. Like, I guess I understand maybe this like general character arc is very traditionally followed in this book, and maybe that's appreciated. I'm not sure. But it definitely was not, it was not for me. Okay, then I read The Ghosts of Eden Park, which is a nonfiction about our real life Great Gatsby. His name was George Remus, and he was the bootlegger of the country. He was going crazy with his alcohol distribution, and his wife, and his affairs, and his eventual demise. While this story could have been so interesting, I felt like the author was like, how can we tell this story in the most drawn out, boring way. I really appreciate the effort that this author put into recovering and researching exact conversations from this man's life, but there were so many details in this that I was just like bored. There was so many things that I felt like I didn't need to have for this book to be really good. So I gave it 3 stars. It was educational. I didn't know a lot about this man, so it was interesting to learn about his life, but overall, I don't think that this book told his story in the best way that it possibly could have. Then I read An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. Again, that was from my YA Fantasy Dream Girl video. This was my first Margaret Rogerson. This is a standalone fantasy where we're set in this kind of like Pixie Hollow-esque world where there's different like seasonal courts. If you've seen the Tinkerbell movies, you know exactly what I'm talking about, okay? My cat's name is Tinkerbell, so I'm highly educated on the subject, but basically the main character Isabel is a portrait artist, and the fair folk of this town, the fae of this world, really crave human craft, and she is like the best portrait artist out there. So a lot of people come to her, and one day the autumn prince of the autumn court comes and gets his portrait done, and she ends up doing something to the portrait that he doesn't really like, and he ends up coming to essentially kidnap her and take her back to his palace to fix it. But along the way, things start to go terribly wrong, and she ends up on a completely different course. I thought that the representation of the fae in this book was so good, and I really, really enjoyed the world that Margaret Rogerson built. I thought it was so fun. There were just a couple of scenes in here where I felt like they were kind of chaotic or not very well explained, and I didn't really know what was going on, and I felt like they were kind of random. And then the ending was a little bit much for me. But overall, I gave this a 3.5. I really enjoyed her writing. I'm actually currently reading A Sorcery of Thorns right now, and I'm really liking it. I'm glad that I got to experience that story this month, and that's all I have to say about that. Then I read Alias Anna, which is a biography written by the grandchild of this woman who was Jewish, and she was a very prominent like child musician. So during the war, she ended up being able to escape the Nazis and kind of hide in plain sight. She used an alias, and she was like pretty beloved between the high-ranking officers as a musician, and so she played for them like year after year, and she had this intimate fear that she was going to be found out. She wasn't, and she like survived it all playing her music, and it's a crazy story. It's a middle grade written in verse. It was super quick to read. I think it took me like 1 hour maybe, and I think that this could be a great introduction for children to World War II and the Holocaust. So I would highly recommend checking it out if you're looking for something along those lines. Then I read another nonfiction, which was A Taste for Poison, and this was so good. I gave this 5 stars. I know that I said Beartown was the only 5-star of the month because I just feel like a 5-star for nonfiction and a 5-star for fiction like aren't really comparable. You know what I mean? Anyway, in this book, we are talking about the historical use of poisons throughout the past couple centuries, their origins, the effects on the body, how law enforcement and court cases have dealt with these charges, how they are recognized, different uses for them, kind of the history of the element itself, if it's just one element like arsenic or, you know, whatever. There's a chapter on polonium, which I literally know absolutely nothing about, but after reading it, I feel really educated about it. And overall, it was just really, really interesting. So if that sounds interesting to you, I would highly recommend it. It was just over 300 pages, lots of different poisons discussed. And I think that it was told in a way that made sense to me. It didn't make me feel dumb. And overall, I just really had a good time reading it. Okay, down to the final 3. I read Same Time Next Year by Tessa Bailey. This is for a romance video that's coming up sometime probably at the end of February or even the beginning of March, because I'm getting through it really slowly. I just can't read a ton of romances in a row. This is Tessa Bailey's Amazon original romance novella. I'm not gonna share my thoughts with you about it. I'm just gonna tell you what it's about because I haven't posted the video yet. So you can look for that at the end of the month if you're interested. In this book, we are following Britta, like the water filter, and Sumner, who is a professional hockey player, and they have to get married on New Year's Eve so that he can stay in the US and play with his hockey team because he's about to go pro, but his green card is about to expire. So it's about them kind of navigating that relationship throughout a year's worth of time. Also for that video, I read Grace, which is book 1 in the Shackelford Sisters historical romance series. We are following Grace, who is like a little clumsy country bumpkin girly pop who ends up getting arranged to marry the Duke of her, I don't know what the correct term is, her region, her town, her city, I don't know. And he is a very brooding, dark man with a mysterious past. She never wanted to get married, and so they are navigating their relationship. It's actually pretty funny, and kind of figuring out what marriage to each other is going to be like and how they can make it work. And the last book that I read this month is Everyone Here is Lying by Shari Lapena. I have read all of her titles in her present and backlist. This is a pretty standard Shari Lapena. It is following a whole bunch of neighbors in a wealthy suburban neighborhood, as all of Shari Lapena's books are. One of the household's daughters has gone missing, and everyone on the street is hiding something from the police, and everyone is also kind of wondering if they were somehow accidentally involved or part of the reason why this girl went missing. Like I said, pretty run-of-the-mill for this author. Follows her like general formula where there's lots of secrets, lots of things to figure out, a couple plot twists, kind of an ambiguous ending, pretty standard formula. So I gave it a 3-star. This author has like a really solid backlist of like 3 and 4 stars for me. I don't think I've ever given her a 5-star, but I think that she writes just really good, like quick, easy to read thrillers, and this one was just fine for me. I think that this would be really fun for someone that is just starting to read thrillers, but for someone that's read all of her catalog, it wasn't super impressive for me. It definitely didn't hit a top tier mark. With that said, those are all of the books that I read in January. This was such a good reading month for me. I don't know if I will be able to match this in any other months this year. Let me know if you've read any of these. Let me know if you have any suggestions of what I should read in February. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out with me today. Bye.